April 7th, 1945, the East China Sea. Somewhere beneath those cold, gray waters, around 2,400 men are dying. In less than 2 hours, the largest, most heavily armed battleship ever constructed by human hands will vanish forever beneath the waves, sent to the bottom on a mission she could never hope to survive. Her name was Yamato, and she was, by every measurable standard, the most powerful surface warship in the history of naval warfare. She weighed 73,000 tons at full load. Her main guns could hurl a shell the size of a compact car nearly 26 miles. Her armored belt was so thick that engineers calculated no existing gun could punch through it. She was, in the truest sense of the word, unsinkable. At least, that's what Japan needed to believe. So how did the mightiest battleship ever built end up at the bottom of the ocean, committed to a mission that was suicidal from the moment it was conceived? That is a story of hubris, desperation, obsolescence, and one of the most catastrophic military miscalculations of the 20th century. Welcome. If you love deep dives into military history, naval warfare, and the stories behind the machines that changed the world, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell so you never miss an episode. Now back to Yamato. To understand why Japan built the Yamato, you have to understand the corner Japan had painted itself into by the 1930s. The Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 had done something that felt deeply humiliating to the Imperial Japanese Navy. It established a ratio. For every 5 capital ships the United States and Britain could field, Japan was permitted 3, the 5-5-3 ratio. On paper, it was a practical arms limitation agreement. To Japan's admirals, it was an insult written in international law. Japan withdrew from the treaty system entirely by 1936. And almost immediately, they began planning their revenge, not in the form of matching American numbers, but in building something so overwhelmingly powerful that quantity would become irrelevant. If you could not have more ships, you would build ships that no other nation could match or sink. The design that emerged was staggering in its ambition. Construction on Yamato began in secret at the Kure Naval Arsenal in November 1937. The shipyard was surrounded by screens and curtains to hide her dimensions from foreign eyes. Workers were forbidden from discussing their work. The Japanese military understood that if the United States ever learned the true specifications of what was being built, the diplomatic and strategic implications would be enormous, and the specifications were extraordinary. Yamato displaced 65,000 tons at standard load, over 73,000 tons fully loaded. For comparison, the American Iowa-class battleships, which were considered engineering marvels in their own right, topped out around 57,000 tons fully loaded. Yamato was in an entirely different category. Her main battery consisted of 9 46-centimeter guns, that's 18.1 inches, mounted in 3 triple turrets. These were the largest naval guns ever put to sea. Each barrel was over 21 meters long. Each shell weighed 1,460 kilograms, nearly 3,000 pounds. At maximum range, those shells could travel approximately 42 kilometers before striking their target. Nothing afloat in 1941 could survive a direct hit from Yamato's main battery at close range. Her armor was equally extraordinary. The main belt armor was 410 millimeters thick, over 16 inches of hardened steel. Her deck armor was 200 millimeters. Her turret faces were 650 millimeters, the equivalent of 2 feet of solid steel. The designers were so confident in her protection scheme that they calculated she could survive hits from any existing gun. Here's the cruel irony at the heart of Yamato's story. By the time she slid into the water, the strategic assumptions that justified her existence had already collapsed. The admirals who designed Yamato were thinking in the strategic language of 1920s naval doctrine, the decisive battle. The idea was simple. In the next great naval war, Japan and America would eventually meet in a single, massive fleet engagement somewhere in the Pacific. Battleships would slug it out at long range. The side with the biggest guns and the heaviest armor would win. Yamato was the trump card. But Pearl Harbor changed everything, and not in the way Japan intended. When Japanese aircraft carriers launched their strike against the American fleet on December 7, 1941, they didn't just damage the battleships moored at Pearl Harbor, They demonstrated in the clearest possible terms that the era of the battleship was over. The aircraft carrier, a platform that could project air power hundreds of miles in any direction, had made the battleship strategically obsolete before Yamato ever fired a shot in anger. Japan itself understood this lesson at some level because it was Japanese carriers that had delivered the strike. But the Imperial Japanese Navy was deeply divided between the battleship faction and the aviation faction, and the battleship admirals were not ready to concede that their life's work had been rendered irrelevant overnight. So Yamato sat. She ferried Admiral Yamamoto to Truk. She served as a floating headquarters. She was so valuable and so irreplaceable in terms of construction resources that commanders were reluctant to commit her to action where she might be damaged or sunk. The Americans called her and Musashi the Hotel Yamato and the Hotel Musashi because they never seemed to go anywhere. If you're finding this as fascinating as I do, make sure you're subscribed so you get every episode of stories like this. Now let's talk about Yamato's brief, brutal combat record. Yamato did eventually fight. October 1944, the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history by number of ships engaged. Japan committed virtually everything it had left in a desperate attempt to destroy the American invasion fleet at Leyte in the Philippines. Yamato was part of the powerful center force under Admiral Kurita. The force took a brutal approach through the Sibuyan Sea, absorbing relentless air attacks from American carrier aircraft. Musashi, Yamato's near-identical sister, absorbed an estimated 19 to 20 torpedo hits and 17 or more bomb hits before rolling over and sinking. She took over 1,000 men with her. Yamato herself was hit by 2 bombs and 2 torpedoes. She was damaged but functional. Then came the Battle off Samar, the moment Yamato came closest to fulfilling her purpose. Kurita's force, including Yamato, stumbled upon a group of small American escort carriers and destroyers. The Americans were massively outgunned. Yamato's 18-inch guns began firing at surface targets. One of the very few times in her career she engaged an enemy fleet directly. And then, in one of the most controversial decisions of the Pacific War, Admiral Kurita turned back. His reasons have been debated ever since. Confusion in communications, uncertainty about the tactical situation, concern about fuel, and the belief that the Americans were mounting a larger counterattack all played a role. Whatever the reason, just as Yamato's guns were finally pointed at a real enemy fleet, the order to retreat was given. She sailed back to Japan, having accomplished almost nothing. By April 1945, the situation was desperate. American forces had landed on Okinawa. The home islands themselves were under threat. Japan's air forces were being bled white by attrition and kamikaze operations that were destroying planes and pilots faster than they could be replaced. The Imperial Japanese Navy was, in practical terms, finished as a fighting force, and yet the admirals could not accept passivity. They conceived of Operation Tengo, a one-way mission. Yamato, 1 cruiser, and 8 destroyers would sail to Okinawa. There would be no meaningful air cover. The force carried enough fuel to reach Okinawa, but not enough for a full return voyage. The plan was for Yamato to beach herself on the shores of Okinawa and use her guns as fixed artillery to support Japanese ground forces. She would fight until she was destroyed. The men who crewed her knew what this was. It was a death sentence dressed up as a mission. One survivor later wrote that when they left port, many of the sailors stood at the railings watching Japan disappear behind them, understanding they would never see it again. On the morning of April 7th, 1945, American reconnaissance aircraft spotted the fleet. What followed was devastating and, in purely military terms, almost surgical. Approximately 386 American aircraft launched from Task Force 58. Hellcat fighters, Avenger torpedo bombers, Helldiver dive bombers. They attacked in waves for nearly 2 hours. Yamato absorbed hit after hit, bomb hits. Then torpedoes, one after another, concentrated on her port side, causing catastrophic flooding. Her anti-aircraft guns roared but could not stop the onslaught. The armored belt that no gun could penetrate was helpless against weapons striking from above and from underwater simultaneously. The torpedo hits concentrated on her port side began to cause catastrophic flooding. She began to list. Damage control teams struggled frantically, but the water was coming in faster than it could be countered. Around 2:23 p.m. local time, the list reached a critical angle. A massive internal explosion tore through her, almost certainly her magazines detonating. A column of smoke rose thousands of meters into the sky and could be seen from the Japanese coast. Yamato was gone. Of the approximately 2,700 men aboard, only around 269 survived, a loss of more than 2,400 men. Today, Yamato rests on the bottom of the East China Sea, split in two, at a depth of around 340 meters. She has become an icon in Japanese culture, a symbol of noble futility, of sacrifice without victory, of a nation that bet everything on the wrong kind of power and paid for it catastrophically. More than 2,400 men died aboard Yamato on April 7, 1945. Their sacrifice deserves to be remembered, not as a glorious last stand, but as a sobering reminder of what happens when military pride outpaces strategic reality. If this story moved you or taught you something new, please hit subscribe and leave a comment below. I'd love to know what you think about Yamato or what military history story you want us to cover next. We have more episodes coming on the great warships, battles, and turning points of the Second World War. You won't want to miss them. Until next time, thank you for watching.